In this demo, I'll show you how to create and apply basic policies and user groups. We'll start off with reviewing the All Users user group. Next, we'll review the Default Settings policy group. Afterwards, we will create a new user group and a new policy group. Number 4, we will set some sample policy preferences. Apply policy to users, and then show you from the user's perspective what the policy did to them. First, we'll log into our CBS web console as an admin. Then, we'll navigate to the User Groups and Policies underneath the blue tile. Once the page loads, you can click on either the User Group tab or the Policy Group tab. We'll first look at the All Users user group underneath the User Group tab. By default, all accounts are a member of the All Users user group, and the default settings policy is automatically assigned to the All Users user group. Neither of these standard groups can be deleted. However, the All Users user group, you can add and order the different policies within it. For now, we only have one policy, the default settings policy. But later, once we create additional policies, we can add it to the All Users user group. And then you can rearrange the ordering so that certain policies are applied before another policy. Let's go ahead and create a new user group. I'll create this one named Finance Group for our finance users. Next, I'll create another user group, the Comedian Group for our comedian accounts. We'll go ahead and assign users to these user groups. I wanted to show you that if you open up the user group, you have a section for assigned users. However, you cannot assign users to a user group via this menu. You would have to go into the Backup User tab, click on an individual user. Under User Profile, there's a tab User Group on the far right. From here, you can assign a user to a user group. Now, this user will be added to the Comedian Group. Notice you see the All Users user group there as well. That cannot be deleted. And let's say you want to delete a user from a user group, you can just mark the box and hit the trash can icon, and then you'll get prompted. But I'm going to go ahead and re-add it back, and then click on the green Save button. Notice that under User Group, Comedian Group, I have the assigned user showing up now. Now if I go into the Finance Group, I want to add users to this group. So then I have to go to Backup User, select a user, so I'll select Adam. Under User Profile, User Group, I select Finance Group, add him to it, save it, and then I also want to add Veronica. Click on Veronica under User Profile, User Group, add it to the Finance Group. Add it, save it, and let's reconfirm. Under User Group, Finance Group, I see that Adam and Veronica have been added to this group. And then double check the Comedian Group. Also show you the All Users user group to see that all of my users are listed in here. Next, I'll show you the Default Settings policy group. So back to my CBS menu, I will click on the Policy Group tab, and then we will go through the various settings. The default settings policy is associated with the All Users group, as this is the go-to policy if no other policy is enabled for a user. You can decide to either make the default settings very strict or lenient, or something in between. It all depends on your business needs. Under user settings, you can set quota limits, user quotas, password aging. You can set email reports, encryption key, upload, client host limits, etc. Under backup set settings, you can exclude backup files, backup sets visible to users, destinations visible to users, etc. GUI settings, this is what they would see from the client agent or not see, depending on this policy. Default values are settings which you can recommend to the user, but the user can override those changes. Preempted values and backup sets cannot be changed once you have defined those policies. Next, we'll create an individual policy. So click on the plus sign to create a new policy. Input the name of your policy. For this one, we will name it Finance Policy, and then save it. We'll also create a second policy for Comedian. Now let's modify the policy, starting with Finance Group. Underneath user settings, we can set quota limits, user quota, shared quota. Let's go ahead and change the password policy. We'll adjust some of the login attempt limits, as well as the password age, complexity requirements. Scrolling down, we can enable encryption key upload. We can set client host limit. We can disable advertisement, and then we can set the email reports policies. Here I can set the blocking period for an IP address by minutes, hours, or forever. Moving on to the third screen, I can change some of the backup set policies. We can select standard destinations, backup set type visible to user, such as enabling only file backup jobs. Cloud file backups source visible to users can be also assigned, as well as GUI settings. There's a difference between the apply column and the view column. If you want to hide a view, uncheck the view box. but leave the apply marked. For example, if I don't want any of the clients, OBM and ACB, to see the social media links, I will mark its respective view checkbox, but leave the apply checkbox marked. If you also uncheck the apply box, then that setting is not applied at all to this policy. If a GUI is not applied, then if there are multiple policies for a user group, then it will look at the next policy. As I scroll through, you see that there are a lot of GUI settings that you can hide. You'll have to go through them one by line on your own to determine whether you need it or not. Stopping at the bottom of the page under Utilities, for the finance group, I will hide Delete Backup Data. Default Values set up some default parameters. Default values are suggestions to the user, but a user can override the value you have inputted. Take, for example, a backup set name for a file backup. I will prefix the default name to be fin-bkset-. So for this finance group, anytime they create a file backup job, their file backup names will prefix with what I default it to be. However, again, they can modify it if they wish. I can also assign backup schedule. So for example, if I want the finance group, whenever they create a backup job, they will have a daily backup schedule at a predetermined time, and whether to run retention policy after the backup or not. So another default value, I'll just start making some changes to the in-file delta. For example, for file backup sets, differential, I can lower the number of deltas from 100 to something such as 29, which is less than 1 month. Next, I'll change the weekly variations for overriding the default type. So for example, Saturday, I will set that to be a full backup job. No, wait. Let's make that Friday instead. Friday will be a full job, not Saturday. Next, let's set the default value for retention policy. So I'll create a new retention policy. We'll give it a name, and we'll leave it for file backups. For how to retain the files in the backup set, we will leave it as simple. Instead of 7 days, we'll make it as 60 days. This will clean up or purge any change files held in the retention area over the threshold. You should understand that for retention area to be cleaned up, there must be a new full job. If this is a differential job, then the old differential will move to the retention area and later purge based on this retention policy. However, if you have an incremental in-file delta chain, due to the nature of the incremental chain, it will keep the first full and all the incrementals leading up to the date you want to restore. So if you don't have a second full job, then all of that previous data and its chains will still be necessary and it will not be purged. Next, let's set the compression for a file backup. We will enable compression policy, assign it a name for file backup, and then we will set the compression type. Next, we will also enable encryption for file backups. As a default, it is 44 alphanumeric characters. An alternative to using default is to select user password or custom. If you select user password, whenever the user creates a backup set, the encryption key will be set to the user's password on that day. Reminder that the encryption key, once set, cannot be changed for the life of the backup set. For preempted values, they are values that cannot be changed by the user. So if you are setting a preempted value, then the user cannot delete or modify whatever setting you have created. Looks like I got an error from one of the previous policy settings. Let me go back and disable that. And then after that, I'm going to save it. Now I'll move on to the Chameleon policy. Underneath the user settings menu, I'm going to scroll down to password. I'm going to set up a different password rule. We'll set the complexity requirements. We'll set the password age. After that, I'll scroll down to encryption key. We'll toggle it on for the policy, but we will not upload it. We will assign the client host limit as 1. Moving down to backup set settings, destinations visible to user, backup set types visible to user. We'll add file backup. Next, under GUI settings, we won't let them see the Google Plus or the LinkedIn social media links, but we will leave Facebook. Oh no, we'll take out Facebook. We'll leave Twitter and YouTube. So they'll see those 2 links, but not the other 3. Yeah, so remember, if you want to hide it in the user interface, uncheck the view box, but leave the apply marked. Since we are modifying the Chameleon policy, underneath the client main menu, I don't want them to be able to do a restore or access the utilities. So I'm going to unmark those 2 view boxes and leave apply marked. All right, now we're done with this. We'll save it. And then now we have to apply the policies to the user group. So going down to the user group, we have to assign the correct policy to the group. For Chameleon group, we assign the Chameleon policy. For finance group, we assign the finance policy. Now, the policies are now activated because we already assigned the users to the user group and now the policies to the user group. Next time the user logs into their client, the policy will be applied. If you need to verify what policy is applied to the user, open up the user properties, look at their effective policy submenu, then drill down to verify if you have done it correctly. If the policy is not correct, check the order of the policy assigned in the user group. As the policy order is top down, if the order has a certain policy enabled or disabled, then the ordering will matter. So, if you have user groups with multiple policy groups, double check the effective policy page for a sample user. It would be best not to overcomplicate your user group with many policy groups. If the first policy does not have a setting, but the second policy does, the second policy could enforce it. And if none of the policies have a setting, it will defer back down to the default settings as the last resort. So I've created the user groups and the policy groups. I've shown you some of the policy preferences. I've also showed you the apply and the view selections through those policies. Now I just want to show you the policy ordering, like I mentioned, which is top down. So as you can see right now, there's only one policy, but let's say if I were to add the other 2 policies to this group, you can see that finance is first, default settings is second, Chameleon is third. You can click and hold down the policy name, then drag to change the ordering. So because I added 2 other policies to this group, let's check on the Chameleon user, look down to effective policy. Now as you can see, some of the policies are named finance policy. That's because its finance policy was ordered first on the assigned policies list. taking a look at backup set settings, you can see that the cloud file backup source, the policy, is using default settings. Because the finance policy did not have any of those cloud file backup sources with the policy, default settings was next on the policy order. So then those policies are now in effect. Returning back to the Chameleon group, we can go ahead and shuffle the order of the assigned policies to make the Chameleon policy first on the list, finance policy second, and default settings last. And now if we check on the backup user, looking at the effective policy, we can see now that the Chameleon policy has replaced some of the finance policies from before. So that was just a demo. So I'm just going to remove the finance policy from the Chameleon group. Now I'm going to tweak some of the default settings policy. But before that, I'm going to make a copy. As the default settings is a catch-all policy, you need to decide if you want to be strict with the policy settings or not strict. So I'm just going to rename my copied default settings policy as a backup, and then modify the actual default settings. So I'm going to go ahead and change some of these settings. I fast forwarded a little bit just because changing those default settings policy was not very interesting to watch. So I'm going to add a number 7. Let's look at how the policy interacts with the OBM client agent. So I've opened up my AhsayOBM client. I'll log in with one of my Chameleon users, Fluffy. As you can see, some of the 6 tiles are missing. Same goes for the standard advertisement at the bottom of the 6 tiles. This is because the GUI policy deactivated them. Let's just reconfirm. Looking at the CBS user interface, we'll open up the user's effective policy page, and then we'll go down to GUI settings, and then we'll scroll down to see that the main menu, restore, view is no. Take a look. The restore button is missing on the bottom left. And also, main menu, utilities, view equals no. And on the bottom right, the location where utilities should be is hidden. And on the far right of the OBM, you see the Twitter icon and the YouTube icon. Those are the only 2 social media links visible. And if you remember from earlier, those are the policies that I had left alone. I've hidden Facebook, Google+, and the LinkedIn social media links. So that's why those 3 are missing. And then when I create a backup set, I'm only given a short list of choices. Again, this was set via the policy, file backup. And where you see the default backup set name, this was also set in the policy. This is a default value. Very first one, name equals default backup set name. And because it's a default value, the user can still modify the name of the backup set. Same goes for the schedule. If you remember earlier in the policies, I assigned a backup schedule policy. Likewise, I had a policy for my storage destination, which is only allowing AhsayCBS. And just to recall, I'll double check the CBS user interface effective policy. Destinations visible to user, AhsayCBS equals yes. Everything else equals no. And lastly, encryption key. If you remember, I had a default value to have it enabled with default. Now again, the user has the option to enable it, disable it, or change one of the settings. I'll log out, and now I'll log in as a user from the finance group. Let's just double check on Adam. Yes, he's part of the finance group. So once I log in, you see the OBM menu, there are 6 tiles, including the advertisement, but missing the social media links on the far right. Let's go ahead and create a backup set. So as you can see, the name of the backup set is prefixed with the words fin-bk set. And again, this was set in one of the policies. And now switching back to the CBS, under effective policy, default values, you can see on the very first line highlighted, this is where the name of the backup set came from. And also a default value for backup schedule, daily at 7 p.m. with run retention policy enabled. So checking the CBS effective policy, scrolling down default values under schedule, applied to file backup, enabled equals yes, name equals daily. Now it's not going to give you every detail about the schedule. You'll have to go into the policy itself to look at that. And also on the main OBM menu, there are no social media links on the far right. Checking the effective policy under GUI settings, scrolling down to social media links, you'll see that view equals no. So the animation you see at the bottom of the 6 tiles, that is the advertisement. Jumping back to the CBS effective policy, underneath user settings, scrolling down to the bottom, you'll find advertisement. Here you can either turn it on or turn it off, or even change the advertisement to your own. So for the advertisement, it's currently visible to the users inside the finance group. Let me update the policy to hide it. Opening up the policy under user settings, scrolling down to the bottom for advertisement, I'm going to turn on the toggle, but make sure the list is empty. And then save this policy. Next, on the client, I need to log out and then log back in. First, let's take a look at the effective policy to check on the advertisement settings. So now I'll re-log in as Adam from the finance group. So as you can see, the advertisement has disappeared. So anytime you make a policy change, the client needs to log out and log in, or otherwise it will not take into effect until the next time they restart the client agent. Let's go back to the CBS UI and then undo the advertisement policy we did to the finance group. Because the advertisement is toggled off, the next policy inside the policy group is default settings. And if you remember, default settings has it turned on. So that's why when the OBM client logs in, it will assume the default settings policy. So let's go ahead and log out of OBM and then log back in. And once again, the advertisement has reappeared. One more thing. Under Finance Group, we're hiding one of the utilities. As you can see, there's only 3 listed here, but there's actually a total of 4. We're hiding one of them. Jumping back to the CBS user interface, inside Policy Group, Finance Policy, GUI Settings, scrolling down, under Utilities, you can see that we are hiding Delete Backup Data. We are showing the other 3. Just showing you at the top, the View column matches with the unchecked box for Delete Backup Data. This concludes the policy demo. Thank you for watching.